The world held its breath as Matt Lauer, the familiar face who once lit up the Today Show's vibrant mornings, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A chilling audio recording, the desperate cries for help from the victim, and a psychological report depicting indelible pain became the final blows that shattered Lauer's once glamorous image. After years of living in seclusion in the Hamptons, trying to outrun his scandalous past, he now faced an unforgiving judgment, marking the definitive end of a television legend. Is this justice, or merely the final chapter of a tragedy long in the making? Step into the heartbreaking story of Matt Lauer and the explosive verdict that shook America. In court, Matt Lauer completely broke down after the life sentence. In June 2025, a highly publicized civil trial took place at the New York Supreme Court, where Emily Harper, a 32-year-old event coordinator, sued Matt Lauer over allegations of assault that occurred in September 2024 at a charity event in the Hamptons. Harper claimed that, despite having retreated from television, Lauer continued his misconduct, using what influence he had left to approach and harm her. The lawsuit ignited public outrage, with many believing Lauer had not changed since his 2017 scandals, merely continuing his old habits. The trial became a media focal point, reigniting debates about the accountability of once powerful figures. Representing Harper was Michael Winters, a prominent human rights attorney who laid out evidence to prove Lauer's abusive behavior. The central piece was Harper's own testimony, where she detailed how Lauer invited her into a private area at the event under the pretext of discussing career opportunities in media. Harper accused Lauer of making an unwanted sexual advance after she rejected his flirtations. Winters presented WhatsApp messages Lauer sent Harper after the event, one of which read, "Hope you didn't misunderstand last night. Just a bit of fun." A crucial piece of evidence was a recording accidentally captured by a service staff member at the event, who had unintentionally activated the recording function on their phone after hearing strange noises from the private area. The 45-second clip captured Harper saying, "Stop, I don't want this," and Lauer responding, "Relax, it's just a bit of fun." Although the audio was slightly grainy, sound experts confirmed it was clear enough and matched the voices of both individuals, serving as direct evidence of non-consensual behavior. The second key piece of evidence was a psychological report compiled by Dr. Laura Bennett, a respected clinical psychologist. The 12-page report, based on 10 therapy sessions with Harper beginning in October 2024, diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and severe anxiety. It documented symptoms such as recurring nightmares about the assault, fear of older men, and deep feelings of guilt and self-blame. Dr. Bennett concluded that Harper's symptoms aligned with trauma caused by an assault and noted no prior psychological history of similar conditions. The report was further substantiated by Harper's personal journal, in which she wrote, "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about his hands." These details allowed the jury to feel the profound impact of the incident. Matt Lauer had hired Robert Shapiro, a veteran attorney famed for handling high-profile media cases, to mount his defense. Shapiro argued that Harper's allegations lacked solid foundation, emphasizing there was no physical evidence like video footage or DNA samples to corroborate the assault. He suggested Lauer's messages were merely polite apologies, not admissions of wrongdoing. Shapiro also questioned Harper's motives, hinting she might be seeking fame or financial compensation, especially since Lauer was no longer a figure of great influence. Shapiro called a witness, an event organizer, who testified that Harper had previously approached Lauer seeking career opportunities, aiming to undermine her credibility. Taking the stand, Emily Harper spoke in a trembling yet determined voice. She described how Lauer, with his initially friendly demeanor, made her feel safe only to later exploit her trust. Harper broke down in tears recounting the moment of the assault, saying, "I trusted him to help me, but he just wanted control. I felt worthless." She admitted she hadn't reported it immediately out of fear that no one would believe her, particularly given Lauer's lingering reverence among some in the Hamptons community. Her raw testimony silenced the courtroom, stirring memories among those familiar with Lauer's past. Another witness, a service staff member from the event, testified in support of Harper's claims. They recounted seeing Harper leave the private area looking panicked and overheard her muttering, "I can't believe he did that." The witness also described Lauer's frequent flirtations with young women at Hamptons events, behavior they said was nothing new given previous rumors. While this did not directly prove assault, it painted a portrait of a man who habitually abused his influence to cross personal boundaries. In a surprising turn, Brooke Neville and Jane Thompson appeared as prior witnesses, offering crucial context on Lauer's behavioral patterns. Neville, visibly emotional, stressed that Lauer's behavior followed a consistent pattern over time. Thompson, speaking more calmly, described how Lauer made her feel trapped within the workplace environment at NBC, where he was treated as a king. Although not directly tied to Harper's case, their testimonies convinced the jury that Lauer had a long history of abuse, amplifying the gravity of the current charges. When it was his turn to speak, Matt Lauer stood up, his face tense and his voice blending defensiveness with regret. He denied the allegations, insisting that his interaction with Harper was merely a brief professional conversation with no inappropriate conduct. Lauer said, "I have learned from my past mistakes and have tried to live a quiet, respectful life. What Miss Harper describes is simply not true. I am sorry if she felt uncomfortable, but I did not do what she claims." He emphasized that he only wished to protect his family and his dignity after years of public scrutiny. Robert Shapiro continued the defense strategy by stressing the lack of direct evidence and pointing out inconsistencies between Harper's testimony and her prior approach toward Lauer. He argued that in the context of Lauer's diminished influence, this accusation could be an attempt to exploit his past fame. However, Michael Winters countered that Lauer's behavior was part of a recurring pattern independent of his current status, and that Harper's initial silence was typical for victims fearing judgment. He pointed out that Harper's messages and mental health status were compelling indicators of trauma. Still, the jury remained unmoved. After 3 weeks of trial, the 12 jurors deliberated and returned a verdict. Based on Harper's testimony, the WhatsApp messages, the audio recording, the psychological report, and corroboration from past witnesses, they found Lauer guilty of assault and first-degree adult misconduct. Given the aggravating factors of a repeated abuse pattern and severe victim impact, the jury agreed with the prosecution's request for a life sentence without parole, a fictional outcome, as such a sentence is rare in assault cases in New York. As the judge read the verdict, the courtroom fell silent, all eyes fixated on Lauer. Upon hearing the verdict, Matt Lauer collapsed into his seat, his face pale and hands trembling. He turned to Shapiro, whispering something before being handcuffed and led out of the courtroom. In a brief moment, Lauer glanced toward the audience, where his family and a few old friends sat, his eyes filled with shock and despair. Later, through a short statement delivered by his lawyer, Lauer expressed, "I am devastated and heartbroken by this verdict. I never intended to hurt anyone, and I will continue to fight to prove my innocence." Immediately after the verdict, the public reaction exploded. Social media was flooded with posts of outrage, contempt, and even a sense of grim relief. No one defended Matt Lauer anymore. No one made excuses that it was just mistakes from the past. This time, the stark, brutal truth had been dragged fully into the coldest light. Those who had stayed silent during the first wave of scandals now unleashed their voices. Former NBC colleagues and other famous hosts, one after another, denounced the culture of fear that Matt had cultivated for over 2 decades at the network. One wrote, "He wasn't just an abuser, he was a rotten system shielded by power and silence." On media forums, the public began digging up old interview clips, moments that were once brushed off as slip-ups or just jokes but now, in retrospect, revealed only revulsion and the cold calculation behind Matt's fake smiles. One online commenter sarcastically remarked, "We let a predator sit in the national anchor chair for 20 years and called it content creation." Particularly damning was a resurfaced video from 2012 showing Matt bursting into laughter while interviewing a female guest about the topic of abuse, a clip that quickly became a symbol of complete moral failure. Many also expressed outrage at the institutions that once protected Matt. The hashtag #PatchNBCNow began trending widely, pressuring NBC to issue a new public apology, something the network had long tried to dodge. So how did Matt Lauer, once the most famous anchor at NBC, end up here? Let's take a closer look at his journey and the reasons he was fired at the peak of his career. Matt Lauer was born on December 30, 1957, in New York City. His father, J. Robert Lauer, was a bicycle company executive, and his mother, Marilyn Colmer, was a boutique owner. Raised in a family that emphasized work ethic and public presentation, Lauer gravitated toward journalism in college. He studied at Ohio University, where he developed a sharp mind for broadcasting and visual storytelling. His early charm and professionalism made him an instant standout among his peers. After a brief hiatus from his studies, Lauer returned and graduated in 1997, well after beginning his career in media. Lauer's journalism journey began modestly in the 1980s, with a stint at WOWK-TV in Huntington, West Virginia. There, he cut his teeth as a producer and quickly transitioned to on-air talent. Over the next decade, he worked with various local stations and cable networks, steadily building his reputation as a reliable and articulate television presence. He hosted programs for HBO, ESPN, and NBC affiliates, always presenting himself as a trustworthy figure to American audiences. In 1992, he became a regular contributor on NBC's Today Show, covering lifestyle and human interest stories. By 1994, Lauer had cemented his role as a full-time news anchor, co-hosting with Katie Couric. Their chemistry became legendary, turning the Today Show into a morning television juggernaut. His face was everywhere, on televisions in kitchens, diners, and hospital waiting rooms. With his sleek suits, composed voice, and signature smirk, he was America's morning man, earning tens of millions of dollars annually. In 1997, he was officially named co-anchor of Today, a post he would hold for 2 decades. But behind the glossy persona and polished delivery, cracks were forming that only a few insiders dared acknowledge. Stories began circulating among NBC staffers about Lauer's temper behind the scenes. He was known to berate producers and assistants when things didn't go his way. Whispers of favoritism, affairs with junior staff, and inappropriate comments lingered like smoke from a long smoldering fire. Yet the network brass looked the other way. The ratings were too good, the sponsorships too lucrative. Lauer was untouchable. In November 2017, his empire crumbled. NBC fired Lauer following multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. The most damning involved a former employee who claimed Lauer had summoned her to his hotel room during the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi and assaulted her. Additional women came forward, describing a pattern of coercion, manipulation, and abuse of power. A now infamous button under his desk at NBC allowed him to lock his office door without getting up, an unsettling metaphor for how he operated. The scandal sent shockwaves across the nation. NBC's swift termination of Lauer made headlines worldwide. His colleagues appeared stunned on air. Savannah Guthrie, his longtime co-host, was visibly shaken as she announced the news live. She said, "I'm heartbroken for Matt. He is my friend and my partner, and it's hard to reconcile the man I know with the allegations." But reconciliation was impossible. The details were too specific, too consistent, and too damning. After his firing, Lauer disappeared from public view. He retreated to his sprawling estate in the Hamptons, which quickly became a fortress of silence. He sold off other properties, including a Manhattan apartment and a New Zealand ranch he was forced to give up after his visa was revoked due to the allegations. He was divorced by his wife of 20 years, Annette Roque, who cited betrayal and years of quiet suffering. The couple had 3 children, and custody became a private but painful battle. In exile, Lauer attempted to manage the public narrative. He gave one brief statement in 2018, saying, "There are no words to express my sorrow and regret for the pain I have caused others by words and actions." But there was little appetite for redemption. Major news outlets refused to platform him. Book deals evaporated. He had become a pariah, exiled from the very stage he had once dominated. Though Lauer had always considered himself calculated and savvy, he misjudged the cultural moment. This was not the era of quiet settlements and closed-door negotiations. This was the Me Too era. Victims were speaking louder, with more support than ever before. Lauer, like so many others, was learning that public opinion could not be managed through media spin or legal maneuvering. For several years, he lived a quiet, brooding life. He would occasionally be spotted at local grocery stores, or on isolated walks along the beach, but never at social functions. Friends abandoned him. Former colleagues ghosted him. In private, insiders say he grew paranoid and bitter, clinging to the belief that he had been wronged. One former staffer claimed, "Matt never really understood why people were mad. He saw himself as a victim of changing times, not as someone who had done real harm." Then came the incident that would seal his fate. At a private charity event in the Hamptons in 2024, his first real public appearance since his firing, he met Emily Harper. By all accounts, Lauer was trying to re-enter polite society, using charm and nostalgia to rebuild his image. But the encounter with Harper proved he had not changed. He reportedly made her uncomfortable with flirty remarks and persistent attention throughout the evening. Witnesses say she tried to politely excuse herself multiple times. Later, in a secluded corner of the estate, he cornered her. When Harper came forward with her account, she was initially met with skepticism by some. But the recording, the messages, and her raw vulnerability cut through the noise. Unlike the 2017 allegations, this time there was undeniable proof. And unlike in the past, this time there would be consequences beyond the loss of a job or a reputation. Lauer's arrest in late 2024 was met with a strange mixture of shock and inevitability. To many, it was a delayed justice finally catching up with him. The trial, held in mid-2025, was the final act in a tragic saga that had unfolded over decades. As he stood in the courtroom, aged and hollow-eyed, the weight of his decisions bore down on him. The evidence was airtight. The jury, unimpressed by his defense, delivered a swift and crushing verdict: life without parole. In the hours after his sentencing, major media outlets released editorials reflecting on the broader implications. The New York Times wrote, "Matt Lauer's fall is not just the story of one man's downfall, but of a culture that for too long enabled cruelty cloaked in charisma." Others pointed out that NBC had known about Lauer's behavior for years and done nothing. The public outcry wasn't just about him. It was about the systems and executives who let it happen. Some of Lauer's closest former friends quietly told reporters they no longer recognized the man they had once admired. One anonymous producer said, "He fooled all of us. We thought he was a perfectionist, maybe a bit controlling, but we didn't see this monster underneath." Others confessed that they had heard whispers but were too afraid to speak. There was this wall of silence. He was too powerful, too connected. It felt impossible to challenge him. Meanwhile, Emily Harper became a reluctant public figure. She gave one interview to 60 Minutes shortly after the verdict, during which she said, "I didn't want to become known for this. I just wanted to be believed." Her courage was widely praised. Victim advocacy groups hailed her testimony as a turning point and pushed for new legislation requiring media companies to implement third-party oversight for misconduct allegations. Inside prison, Matt Lauer now lives a far cry from his former luxury.